Yeah, hi folks. Now it used to be called pollution and then it became global warming. But that didn't add up, so they called it climate change. But that wasn't scary enough, so they're now calling it extreme weather events or extreme climate events. But no, it's much, much worse than that according to The Guardian, the far left arbiters of the truth. Auckland floods. City begins clean-up after biggest climate event in New Zealand's history. What absolute garbage. Now it was bad, but no worse than anything we've had before. Remember Cyclone Bowler?
Tonight, violent storm batters much of the North Island. 4 people believed dead and thousands evacuated. Good evening.
Network News for Tuesday the 8th of March. Gale force winds and torrential rain have wreaked havoc in many parts of the North Island. 4 people are feared dead, hundreds have been forced from their homes.
In some places, the roofs of houses were ripped off. In others, roads have been closed by floods and slips. And in many areas, people were without electricity for up to 24 hours.
The savage aftermath of Cyclone Bowler claimed an elderly farmer's life near Whangarei when he drowned while trying to move stock to higher ground. And on the east coast, 3 other people are missing, presumed drowned. Their car was swept away by a swollen river at Tolaga Bay.
The worst hit areas are the east coast, North Taranaki and Northland. On the coast, Wairoa has been split in 2 by the collapse of the town bridge. Floods have also swept away Wairoa's water mains and power and telephone lines. The Mayor has appealed to residents to conserve water and food. A state of emergency was also declared in Gisborne as nearby rivers burst their banks, flooding low-lying areas. Hundreds of people were evacuated from their homes in several small settlements inland from Gisborne. In North Taranaki, gale force winds blew the roofs of several houses. Between New Plymouth and Oakura, about 300 homes were damaged by the winds, which are continuing tonight. And there were high winds and flooding in Northland. Much of the area around Whangarei was without electricity for many hours, and some places won't have power restored until tomorrow. The town of Dargaville has a critical water shortage after floods swept away its main pipelines. Civil Defence Minister Michael Bassett flew to the East Coast today to look at the damage there and afterwards said the Cabinet will meet next Monday to consider financial aid for areas affected by the storm. Tonight, Wairoa on the East Coast is still cut off from the rest of the country. The town's been deluged by rain for 2 days and today its bridge carrying State Highway 2 across the local river was washed away.
The people here weathering the storm overnight woke up this morning to find most of the Wairoa River Bridge gone. With it went the water supply and telephone lines. The town itself is effectively cut in half.
As I was coming up towards it, I must have been about 15-20 metres away from the actual opening of it, and I saw the bridge just virtually be swept away.
It must have looked pretty weird.
It did, actually. I stopped my car straight away. I just couldn't believe it.
The crunching as the whole bridge obviously ripped away from the buttresses either side.
It must have made a tremendous noise.
Yes, it was. It was rather, how do you say, nerve-wracking, really.
This afternoon, the swollen river was still pounding at the torn remains of the bridge. Emergency services can only communicate on 2-way radio. They've ordered everyone to stay out of the way inside.
Forward have locked one bowser and it is only going to be used for essential services.
Wairoa's immediate problems are petrol, food and water supplies. Food is being ferried across a railway bridge, but it's a treacherous journey. The bridge is being pounded by logs and the river is rising. Households will only get an hour's fresh water supply daily until the emergency's over. But another serious problem is the town's isolation. Roads north and south are cut off. Wairoa normally gets daily food supplies from other main centres. Outlying farmlands report flooding, but few homes have been evacuated, and authorities say it's too early to assess stock losses. Local police and civil defence staff say there's nothing they can do but wait. Wait until the rain and wind abate, but more importantly, until the river goes down. But late this afternoon, it was still rising, leaving authorities holding their breath, watching other bridges and other roads.
The Gisborne region has had floods before. Today it was flooded again on a frightening scale. Thousands of hectares of farmland were swamped after torrential rain for 40 hours. Waipa River rose 11 metres.
The river rose 11 metres.
Millions of tonnes of water surging seaward. The tragedy hit farmers severely. Kiwi fruit, maize, tomatoes, grapes, apple and sweet corn disappeared beneath the deluge. For the locals, the rain brought heartache. The coming crisis was evident last night. Emergency services evacuated 500 residents from the tiny settlement of Tikaraka. With danger to life averted, residents could reflect on the damage to property. This will be the worst we've seen it.
In Gisborne City, the Waimata and Torohiro rivers burst their banks. Homes and streets were flooded. At Wairanga Okuri, a new 6-kilometre wide lake was formed when a hill fell into a river and made a natural dam. Many houses were flooded right up to their roofs, and the local hall was completely underwater. The mark on the power pole shows where the water reached.
That's where the water reached to. And Southland's flood?
The worst floods in memory struck Invercargill and parts of rural Southland on Friday 27th of January 1984. The disaster was foreshadowed by a National Weather Office report 2 days earlier. Heavy rain was likely for 24 to 48 hours, possibly over the whole South Island. The weather map for the next day, Thursday 26th of January, showed a cold front was stationary over Southland and not expected to move for 18 hours. Torrential rain fell during that Thursday, and by nightfall, all Southland rivers were in high flood. In the following days, an estimated 5,000 people were forced to leave their homes. Flooding caused evacuations at Tuatapere, Tautau, Thornbury, and Riverton, as well as Invercargill. Flooding was extensive in Invercargill, especially in the northern suburbs of Grasmere and Waikiwi. A state of local civil defence emergency was declared at 0400 hours on Friday 27th of January and extended to cover the Southland region at 1000 hours the same day. The scenes that follow were compiled from television news coverage of the emergency. They raise a number of points for later discussion, especially the question of replacing civil defence people in critical positions before they become too tired or overstressed.
More than 500 people have been evacuated from their homes in the Invercargill area, and hundreds more have been forced out of their homes in Otautau and Tuatapere in western Southland. Preparations for the emergency started on Wednesday when heavy rain started falling. Civil defence staff were assembled last night. A state of emergency declared at 4 o'clock this morning. Drains and sewers couldn't cope with the deluge, and water started running along city streets and into adjoining properties. Added to the problem, local streams burst their banks, putting parts of Invercargill under several metres of water. Late this morning, rain started to ease and it looked as if floodwaters would drop, but rivers continued to rise and the situation further deteriorated. There were more evacuations when the Otapuni stream, which flows through the centre of the city, flooded. Early this afternoon, the Waihopai River on the northern outskirts of the city breached its stop banks, and families were evacuated from about 300 houses in Gladstone by trucks and helicopters. Water from the Waihopai also flooded an industrial area. Evacuation tenders were set up in 2 schools and in the Invercargill Scottish Hall, and some families are staying with friends. Police, firemen and army personnel were flown to Invercargill today to boost local emergency services. Transport was severely disrupted. Floodwaters soon forced traffic off city streets, and roads throughout Southland were also cut. The province's only link with the outside world was by air. In one 24-hour period, 80 millimetres, that's about 3 1/4 inches of rain fell in Invercargill. The forecast is for further showers near the coast, but the weather should clear inland.
Defence authorities have now lifted restrictions on people returning home, although in many cases their houses are still far from habitable. Late today, the authorities decided to keep the state of emergency in force in Invercargill and parts of rural Southland until everyone's housed properly again.
Now, the Great Flood of 1878 was one of our worst floods ever, but sadly there's no footage of it. But I found this from an encyclopedia and recorded it. A long severe winter had left an unusual depth of snow on the river's mountain watersheds. Subsequently, hard frosts consolidated the snowfields, which were over 100 feet deep in places. Spring came in cold and sharp, and as most settlers calculated, the frosts held the snows fast. Then in September, warm northwesterly winds blew for several days, followed by 36 hours of continuous warm rains. The thaw set in swiftly and terribly. On 26 September 1878, the Clutha and all of its tributaries rose ominously. By the end of the month, every river and stream in the district was in flood, and these waters all flowed down to swell the Clutha. On 10 October, a further 24-hour downpour of warm rains hastened the already rapid thaw, with the result that for 200 miles from the mountains to the coast, settlers and urban communities found themselves faced with annihilation. In unprecedented flood, the Clutha carried houses, bridges, timber, furniture, farm equipment and livestock down to the sea. At Cromwell, the floodwaters reached 35 to 40 feet above normal, and nearly every town along the river's banks was inundated. Heavy bridges costing thousands of pounds at Clyde, Roxburgh, Beaumont and Balclutha were swept away by the debris-laden waters. Now, according to climate propagandists, they keep banging on about frequent extreme weather events. But according to NIWA records, they've been happening since 1846. Now, if you come to this page, you can see 1846 Waikato storm, 1857 Tasman Nelson flooding, and you scroll up, 1862 Otago flooding, 1863 Otago snow and flooding, 1865 West Coast flooding, and so on and so on and so on. And you click the previous page and you scroll down to the bottom. February 1866 Tasman Nelson flooding, 1866 Auckland storm, 1867 West Coast flooding, and so on and so on and so on. Click the previous page and do the same right up to the current date. Now, the irony is stark. The very same people who called for high-density housing in Auckland are now calling for more grass areas to soak up the rain. Anyway, folks, I've posted all the relevant links below.